What is your name?
Raymond Hauk Jr.,
And what's your birth date?
May 20th, 63.
Okay, and what war did you serve in?
I was in Operation Just Cause in Panama and then Operation Desert Seal, Desert Storm in the Persian Gulf.
And what branch of service?
Army.
All right, what was the highest rank that you achieved?
Staff Sergeant.
Okay, and uh, we're here doing this recording where?
At my house in Leesburg, Virginia.
Okay, and my name is Carol Joseph, and you're a friend?
Yes, yeah.
And the interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Okay, we'll start by talking about a few biographical details.
Okay.
All right. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Youngstown, Ohio in 1963.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about your parents.
My father, he was born and raised in Miami, Florida, and he dropped out of school in the 8th grade and did the circus circuit. He traveled with the circus for a while after he dropped out of school, and then he joined the Navy and was in the Navy for 3 years, I believe it was, and he's one of the ships that he was on was the Valley Forge, and I can't remember what the other name of the other one was. But my mother, she grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. My grandfather was a plumber for the Pennsylvania Railroad, and no one was, neither one was rich by any means. But my father met my mother through a friend of his when they were on leave and 6 months after they met, they got married, and he got out of the Navy.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I have two sisters. One lives in Lesby. She was married to a man in the Air Force. He retired out of the Air Force. My brother and other sister both live in San Antonio. My brother was a 9-year veteran of the Navy. And my other sister, my youngest sister, she wasn't able to serve because of some medical problems, but she now lives down there with her husband and 4 kids.
Super. Okay. And tell us a little bit about your youth and why you, what led to your joining the armed forces.
Well, everybody in my family at some point or another was in the military. My uncle, who has always been my mentor, it's my mother's brother. He enlisted in the Marines when he was 16, got out of the Marines, went into the Army, got out of the Army, and then retired from the Air Force. He spent 2 tours in Vietnam, and everything about him, it always intrigued me. He was always one to always take a chance on something, and he used to always laugh on when they would have competitions between the armed forces, and the Marines would always say, "Oh, you're in the Air Force. You'd be lucky if you can even see the target, let alone hit it." And they would always be surprised that when he did really well, that they said, "Oh, he had to have been in the Marines." And he told them, "Yes, he was in the Marines," and that. And I knew that I wanted to go into the military, and I'd always thought, okay, I wanted to go into the Air Force like he did. Well, when it came certain closer to my graduation date, I was trying to think, do I want to go to college or do I want to go in the military? College really wasn't a big, goal for me. I really didn't think that, didn't really consider going to college at that time. My mother was upset, which, everybody wants to see their kid go off to college, but I really wasn't I sent out all my applications and everything. I went through the motions like I was going to go to college, but I really had no desire to go to college, and I wanted to go into the Air Force. Well, in 1979, I went down and I was 16. Talked to the Air Force, and they, oh no, you need to come back in another year. So I said, okay. So I went back in my beginning of my senior year in high school and said, okay, I want to enlist in the Air Force. And I went downtown. I had to do all of this on my own, because if my mother found out that I was trying to get into the military, she would have had a fit. So I went down, and all of the armed forces in Youngstown, in the downtown office, they were all in the same office complex, kind of like. And there was a door that opened out onto the street, and you walk into this hall, and there was one on each side. You had the Army right there at the front, then you had the Marines, and then you had the Navy, and then the Air Force, and the National Guard, and then the Coast Guard. So I walked in, I went all the way down the hall, and when I walked in, there was this E7. He was Sergeant First Class with the Army. He's standing there at the door for the Army recruiting office, and I said hi and continued on down the hall. And I went all the way down to the Air Force, and there was a sign that said, out to lunch. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me, they're out to lunch? So I was like, all right, I'll come back in an hour. So I was walking out the hall, back down the hall to go out, and that E7 was still standing in the door, and he said, can I help you? And I told him, I said, yeah. I said, do you happen to know when the Air Force recruiters are going to be back? He said, oh, they're gone for the day. They're not going to be back, probably till Monday or Tuesday, because it was a long weekend. It was going to be a holiday weekend. I'm like, okay. He goes, well, maybe there's something that I can do for you. And I said, well, maybe. I said, I don't know. I said, what do you have that the Air Force, could? And I told him, I said, I don't want to get into any combat arms. I said, I don't want to be infantry. I don't want to be artillery. I don't want to get into tanks. I said, I want to go and do something in the Army that I can get out of the Army with and get a decent job without having to go to college. Oh, we've got you covered. Don't worry about it. We've got just about any kind of job that you can imagine. And he said, what do you like to do? I said, well, I'm, pretty good with electronics. We got the best electronics schools that they have in the Army. So, anyway, one thing led to another. And next thing I know, he's got me scheduled to go take my ASVAB test, which is an aptitude battery that you have to be, I guess, I don't know how they do it, but you have to score particularly well in certain areas to be able to get into a job. And he had me scheduled for that, and then I had my physical scheduled, and then the next thing I know, I'm raising my right hand in Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm off my way off to Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. And that's where it started, and I never looked back after that.
It's quite a story.
Yeah.
And then after you joined, what happened next?
Well, I took my basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, which is in Missouri, in the hottest time of the year, in summer months. And then after I finished my basic, I was sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which is, I was in communications, and my particular job, most all of the other communications and everybody that was in the Signal Corps went to Fort Gordon, Georgia. Well, I had the one unique job in the Signal Corps where they figured it was better that I be closer to the artillery, because we supported artillery more than we did anybody else. Which, when I actually got into the job, wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false. So I spent 3 months taking my advanced training of being a tactical communications specialist in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And from there, I went off to the 1st Armored Division in Germany. And I spent 5 years total in Germany. When I got there, I loved it. It was just, the greatest thing. I enlisted for 3 years because I didn't think that I would want to stay. So my duties, when I signed my contract and everything, I said, okay, this is what I want, and I want to go to Europe. So they said, okay. So off to Europe I went. When I got there, I loved it. When it came time for me to re-enlist, I told them that I wanted to re-enlist PDA, which is present duty assignment, and I also wanted to go to jump school. So I went off to jump school in Fort Benning.
What is that?
It's airborne. So I went to jump school at Fort Benning, came back to Germany, and found out that since I did so well at jump school and have been doing so well at my current unit, I was being reassigned. So I was being attached to the 10th Special Forces group down in Bad Tolz. So my next 2 years I spent down in Bad Tolz, which is just a small town that's outside of Munich, and another picturesque place that you can just close your eyes and think of the Bavarian Alps, and it's just simply beautiful. And I tried to re-enlist again and stay over there, but they said no, you have to go back to the States. You've been here too long. So left there, was assigned to the 104th Military Intelligence in Fort Ord, California, with the 7th Infantry Division. We were the only airborne unit in the entire post. It was also the first light infantry division that they had, and when you have infantry commanders that like to have something new, they want to experiment with it, they do a pretty good job with it. I was stationed in Ord for 4 years, and of that 4 years, I was only actually on base 9 months. The rest of it was deployments around the world, in the Pacific, Central and South America, different places. With the unit I was with, we were unique in that we supported every unit in the division.
What exactly did you do again?
I was a communications, I was a repairman operator, but my position or my actual job had changed so many times over the years that it actually became more of a tactical deployment, communications deployment, where we would actually decide, what we were going to be using for communications meetings during different exercises that we had.
So you were in California at this time,
Yeah, I was in California. When I was with the 1st Armored Division, my job and my team's job was basically to keep the communications for an armored battalion running all the time. I was with the Combat Support Company, and then the Army's restructuring. They no longer wanted a Combat Support Company, so they put us all in a Headquarters Company, and then they said, okay, well, there's too many people in the Headquarters Company, so they put us into the different line companies, and then they reorganized how they were going to structure things again, and took all of the support personnel from the line companies and put them back in Headquarters Company. It was quite interesting there for a number of years.
And so while you were in California, you were supporting these groups at that time?
Yes.
And how long did you do that then?
I was there for 4 years.
4 years?
Yeah. During that, I'd went with the 9th Infantry Regiment to the Sinai on 2 different occasions, the multinational peacekeeping force. I was with them 2 different times, Thailand, Japan, Korea, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, a lot of different places.
You went to a lot of different places.
Yeah.
Can you describe to us 1 or 2 of those locations and what you did, what you saw there, how you supported?
Well, when we would spend a lot of time in Peru. We were actually helping their military down there. We were training with them, and a lot of it was geared towards guerrilla warfare, because they were having some serious problems. In fact, everywhere in Central and South America during that period had some major problems with the drug cartels, communist guerrilla factions, and that trying to take over different parts of the country. And our mission was to not so much as in a combat role, because we weren't there in a combat capacity, but we were there to support them and advise them in different things. And my job was just to make sure that the communications lines between the commanders on the ground in, let's say, Peru or in Thailand were kept open all the time back to the United States, so that they could make sure that the information that we needed to have was given to us, and that we needed to get back was sent back.
Was there ever a time when the communications, something happened?
Whenever you have electronics involved, there's always something this is going to happen. So you always have to have. You can't go out there saying, "Okay, I'm just taking this." You go out and you have to have a contingency for any possibility that you can have go wrong. I can remember one time when I was actually stationed in Panama after the invasion that I was with a patrol group that was out looking for a plane that had crashed back in 1943 that we had been told was out in the middle of the jungle in the province of Boca del Toro. And I had my satellite radio, I had an AM radio, and I had an HF radio. And my rucksack was probably one of the heaviest there, because I not only had the 3 radios and the antennas, but the batteries to go with it. And the only guy that had more in his backpack than I did was one of the engineers who was carrying all of the explosives. And we tracked through the jungle for 4 days before we finally found the plane.
Wow. And then when you found it, do you typically just radio back for?
Radio back, give them the information, give them the location. In Panama, once you get out of the city, it's completely jungle. It's a triple canopy jungle. And once we found the plane and we identified that, it was one of our planes, and it is back from when they said it was. I radioed back, told them, gave them the location, and then the engineer started clearing out an LZ. So that's why they were carrying all the explosives. So they blasted through the jungle, cut down the trees, and made an LZ. And we were able to get some forensic people out there that actually dug up part of the hilltop that the plane was on to see if they could discover the bodies, but we weren't able to find the bodies. But we think that over the years, or actually when it happened, that the local indigenous Indians had taken the bodies and probably buried them, or something like that.
And during this time when you were going to all these locations, you were basically kind of headquartered in California, is that right?
That was my home base.
That was your home base, okay. And was that where you were, we see here that there were some battles and campaigns that you were part of.
Yeah.
Did that also happen during that same period?
No, I was actually being assigned to Panama when the invasion came up. And in fact, I was there less than a week before the invasion happened. I got there, December 17th, and the invasion kicked off on December 20th. And there,
What year was that?
1989.
Okay.
And I was assigned to the Special Operations Command, SOCOM, down in Panama, and I was with a unit that was part of a much larger element that was going to take the airfield in Rio Alto. Right before we were supposed to jump in, there were some stealth fighters. At that time, all of the stealth technology and everything was all new. It had never been used or proven at all. And the stealth fighters were to use guided missiles to take out the barracks. But for some reason, the missiles fell short, and we ran into a little bit stronger resistance than what we had thought we would have. But over several hours, we were able to actually take the airfield with as much shooting and firing and everything. After it was all said and done, I was amazed that we didn't actually lose more than we did. In fact, my group, we didn't lose anybody, which was good.
This was the
Rio Alto.
We have 4 minutes, 30 seconds.
Seriously?
Yes.
Wow.
Okay.
And you thought you were gonna be worried.
Well, I have a whole lot more I'd like to ask because we haven't even gotten to Desert Shield yet.
Yeah, that was part of the 18th Airborne with that.
Okay. Well, I guess let's finish up. So this was all in Panama. Is that correct? What
For
you just
the
described?
yes, that was all in Panama.
Okay. And then from there, after you came back to home base and that was...
Oh no, Panama then was my new home base. I had PCS, permanent change of station, to Panama. And while I was in Panama, that's when Desert Shield kicked off, when Hussein invaded Kuwait. And I volunteered to go to the Desert, to support in the Desert Shield. And then that's when I got orders to go to the 18th Airborne Corps in Saudi Arabia.
Okay. Well, maybe we should stop there and then come back and continue and finish
Sure.
the remainder.
Yeah.
You know, that would be great. Like, why don't we just stop there?
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
All right.
This is the end of part 1.
This is just fascinating.
We'll be back after the break.
Today is Sunday, September the 30th, 2012. We are in the home of Mr. Raymond RHouck Jr. and talking about his tour of duty. And we'll be starting in Panama in roughly 1989 to discuss those experiences, and this is a continuation of a previous interview.
Okay. Like I said, I was in Panama 3 days before the invasion started, and the unit that I was assigned with was our mission was the airfield at Rio Alto in Panama, and we were to take the airfield and make sure that we could secure it, and also that the Panamanians, or General Noriega at the time, was not able to get any of his aircraft into the air. This is the first time that we had used many of the weaponry that we had, like the Apache helicopter, the stealth fighter. So there were a lot of unknown factors for a lot of us. And one of the things was that the stealth fighters were supposed to have taken out the barracks that were at the airfield that we were going into, but they had missed. Most of them had missed, so we ended up having heavier contact than what we were told that we could anticipate, which, if you're in the Army, you always plan for the worst, okay, because not everything always goes as what everyone would hope or expect, but that's the nature of war. It was night when we went in, and we jumped in, and even though that the fighters have been shelling the area for some time before we got there. I think we still caught them by surprise. I don't think they expected us to show up in the force that we did. We fought through the night. Our casualties were surprisingly very low. I know that some units, in fact, for the whole campaign, we had very few that were killed in action. The number of wounded was very low. So it was, all in all, a very successful thing that we did throughout the, that all the units did throughout the campaign. And after it was over, there was a period of time, we had pretty much decimated their military, their police force. They don't have a police force kind of like what we do. Their police force was intermingled with their military in many ways, so that when we took out their military force, we pretty much took out their police as well, police capabilities. So for the next 2.5, 3 months, we spent rebuilding their police force and their National Guard. And during that time, we were primarily responsible for policing, keeping the peace and making sure that things didn't get out of hand. All in all, the Panamanian people, I think, were glad to have Noriega gone. Panamanian people are just like people anywhere else. They just want to go on and have their own way, move on with their lives. They didn't see us as occupiers that I had ever known. I got to have a lot of friends that were Panamanian, and the one thing that sticks out in my mind, though, the whole time is that for the next 2.5 months after the invasion was over, it was pretty calm. There wasn't anything going on, but then we weren't allowed to go out and go to any of the bars or anything. We were pretty much locked down to the barracks, and the only way that we could leave is if we had orders, and they had to be written orders saying that we were going from here to here, or we were doing this or that. And then at the end of February of 1990, when they started to relax some of the restrictions, in fact, it was the very end of February, the last day of February. I can't remember if it was a leap year or not, but it was the last day of February. And we were all excited because we were going to be able to get out, because everybody's been penned up on the barracks for so long, and they weren't allowed to do anything. The NCO club or the All Ranks club or even the officers club, it's a nice place to go, but it's still on the military base. You still have a lot of rules and restrictions, and then we were also limited onto how much we could actually drink. So everybody wanted to get out and party. So my squad and I, once we got the word, we made plans that we were going to go out and go to this place. I was pretty much still new, even though I'd been there for a few months. I was still new, and all of my guys knew of all of the nice places to go to. So March 5th, we went out. And we were going to the club. We were all having a good time. But for some reason on that night, someone had decided that what they didn't like what we had done, that they wanted to make a statement. It was the place we were at was called My Place. It was in downtown Panama City, and a place where a lot of GIs go to. And the way that this bar was set up is that off of the street level, you would walk down some stairs and you go through, and there's this partition that's in the area of where the dancing and the drinking and tables all are. And we're not sure exactly who or how they did it, but somehow someone had tossed a grenade into the club, and it was full of GIs and Panamanians, and it rolled out onto the dance floor. And one of the guys in my squad, Anthony Ward, saw it. And he jumped on it. And when it exploded, he was on it. There were 3 other guys that were injured, and about 16 Panamanian civilians that were injured also. We got them to the hospital as quick as we could. One of the guys that we were with, he had a car. Not many of us had cars. So we put him in the car and we took him to Gordas. Which was the Army hospital there. For the next 18 and a half hours. He was in surgery. And finally the surgeons come out. And they told us that there was nothing more that they could do. That he had passed on. But that he had fought the whole time to stay alive. That was the only time I ever lost anybody. And it wasn't even during the fighting. It was after all of the fighting had been over. Everybody thought that everything was fine. I just remember him going to the floor, and I didn't know why, because I was sitting at the table with the girl that I was with. And the next thing I know, we heard this loud explosion. And there's just so many things that go through my mind about why did he do that? You know, he didn't have to. But if he hadn't, probably more people would have been killed. More would have been hurt. We had a service for him there. And we paid for his mother and father to come, even though the military would have done it. You know, the rest of the guys in my platoon, we all pitched in and got them their own flight. We all got to meet their parents, and the ironic thing about the whole thing was his mother was from Houston, Texas, but his father is Panamanian, which we never knew because he never talked about his parents a lot. And I thought it strange that his mother seemed to be well with everything. But she told me that Tony had always wanted to be in the Army, that the Army was his life, that he was going to live and die with the Army. And that she's not surprised that he gave his life for others. But that was on March 5th, 1990. And of everything that I've ever done or I've ever seen, there's one day in my life that I'll just never forget. And I'll never forget him. And you know, I was at that time, I was already pretty much at my halfway point, because when I got there, Panama was a hazard duty tour, which is only 12 months. So, you know, it was getting time for me to re-enlist anyway. So I wasn't sure if I wanted to at that point or not. But I did. I re-enlisted for another 2 years. And did a lot of things, went to a lot of places in Central and South America. You know, like I said earlier, in Peru. I don't think there was anywhere in Central or South America that I hadn't been to. Between my duty at Ord and then being stationed in Panama. And then Desert Storm, or Desert Shield, came around. Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait, small country in the Middle East. And for most of us, you know, Panama was still fresh in our minds. And we knew then what a lot of this new weaponry was capable of doing. And I think when it came around, when Desert Shield came around, all of us, because for so many years we have been part of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, and we were always wondering, okay, if we were actually go head to head against Soviet military equipment, how would ours fare? And I think some of us who had been through all of that, because the Cold War was a very real war to many of us in many cases, always wondered, okay, Saddam Hussein has a lot of Soviet equipment as well as American equipment because he'd buy it from anybody he could, and we supplied him with weapons and things like that when he was at war with Iran back in the early 80s. because at that time he was our friend, because anybody that was an enemy of Iran because of the hostage crisis, we were pretty much willing to do anything we could to see the Iranians fall. So we were all also kind of hoping that if President Bush was able to come up with enough force or enough resolution to convince Hussein to leave, that we wouldn't have to go to war. But as time went on, you could see that he just wasn't going to go, and things for the Kuwaitis were getting worse and worse. We were getting a lot of reports about the Iraqis having mass killings, going door to door, killing men, women, children. Nothing you ever hear is ever nice about something like that. You can never hear anything good.
Have you been stationed? Were you not stationed in Saudi Arabia?
No,
No, okay, you're still.
I was still there in Panama, and they started putting the word out that they were looking for volunteers to go to the desert. At first, I wasn't going to, but then I started thinking that, this is, what we've been trained for, and I felt that, it was probably my place to be there, Even though a lot of guys that I knew, they said that they had done their time in several other campaigns. Because we had guys that were, assigned to us that had been in the invasion of Grenada back in '82. We had almost everyone that was in the unit was in the invasion of Panama. And then there have been a lot of other different things, many things that people forgot about as soon as they finished reading a story, But I decided that I was going to do it. So I went over to our S1, which is our personnel department, and I told them that I wanted to sign the papers to send me over, to be assigned to the desert. And I thought it was going to take a little bit of time to get it done, but if there's one thing you learn with the Army, when they need something, they find ways of making it move pretty fast. And it's usually not to your benefit. If it's to your benefit, then it's going to take a while. But if it's to theirs, it can move really fast. 2 weeks after I put in the paperwork to go, I got orders that was attaching me to the 18th Airborne. And I thought it funny that they were just attaching me to the 18th Airborne instead of assigning me to the 18th. But I found out later that the reason that they only attached me is because they wanted me back. And if I was assigned, then that would be a regular permanent change of station. So in order to make sure that I returned to Panama, I was only attached to them. So there was myself, probably about 40 or 50 other guys. We went over to the supply building where we get all of our gear at, and they issued us all of our desert equipment that we would be needing. And then we went to Albrook Air Force Base, got on a plane there, flew into Fort Stewart, Georgia. We were going through some training there, and then that's pretty much where they split everybody up. Went from Fort Stewart to Fort Bragg, and I trained with some of the guys there at Bragg for a little while, a couple of weeks there. and then we flew back to Saudi. Probably about a week after I got to Saudi is when it changed from Desert Shield to Desert Storm. And I was with the 18th Airborne Corps, and we were to work on the left flank of the Iraqi force, and we were deep in Iraq. And our mission was to secure an airfield where they had suspected Scud missiles, because Scud missiles have been raising havoc throughout everywhere. So we didn't know what to expect when we got there, but it sure wasn't what we found. We did find a couple of launchers that were there, but rather than fight, they gave up pretty quickly. And all in all, the Desert Storm went, very fast. I don't think they knew what hit them at first, but it was a great success, and we accomplished our mission within 100 hours. Yeah. Okay. And then after that, I went back to Panama and got out from there. I'm often wondered what it would be like to go back in, but I'm done.
Right. Well, thank you so very, very much for sharing your story with us. And we'll go ahead and close that, and greatly appreciate your time.
Well, thank you.